Okay, I'll just settle some expectations. One, I'm a pastor, so I don't, most of what I want to talk to you about is not so much scholarly stuff, but pastoral stuff. And so we'll be talking a lot about just application-based things with sexuality. That's one. Two, this is not a sermon, so I'm not going to speak the way I normally would on a Sunday sermon. So it's not going to be your typical open up your Bibles, turn, we're going to exegete a text of Scripture, and then we're going to, do observation, application, interpretation. We're not going to do that. I'm going to assume a lot of that, and if you want to see more of the exegetical and theological work, it is in that book, my book, God's Good Design. So tonight, I want to, here's the lay of the land, what we'll do over the next 4 sessions. Tonight, I want to do 2 sessions. The first one is, how did it come to this? So how did we get to where we are in the year of our Lord, 2024? And then second session, I want to give you a biblical foundation for the household. And we will get into more exegetical stuff with Genesis in the next session. And then tomorrow, it's going to be a lot of application. And I'll give you 12 principles for first generation patriarchy. And I'll start him and just get as far as we can in the first session. We'll take a break and then I'll finish it in the second session. And then I'm speaking at Jason's church on Sunday. So for those of you that are at Jason's church, that will be more of a sermon. And we're going to look at sexual immorality. And so I'm sure they have it online and whatnot. And so if you're interested in hearing that part, check out that message at Jason's church. So one other thing. I don't know you. You don't know me personally. And I'm going to trust that what I share with you will be received in the spirit that I intended. And I want to trust that you will honor the things I want to share with you, because I want to share with you, at least tonight, here at the beginning, I want to share some of my own testimony. And I want to be plain spoken because I think it's how to be most helpful. And even if it chafes a bit, friction is where we grow. We don't grow when everything is just easy, silky smooth. We grow whenever there's friction and whenever there's challenging. So I want to share some of the unfiltered goods tonight. And I want to tell you some of my own story, and I hope you'll be gracious with that and not use that against me or my family, because I want to tell you some painful things from my family. Rumor has it there's a dude out there protesting, by the way. What are we? A hate-filled death cult is what's going on in here. I don't know if you saw the dude out there with a sign. So hate-filled death cult guy, if you're in the room, don't be like, tweeting things that I say and trying to get me in trouble. But if I do say anything that, okay, I disagree with that, or I'm upset by that, or that I'm offended by that, that's okay. I'm kind of hoping to provoke in a good way, some thought and discussion that you might have. And if you are offended, that's okay, and I'd be happy to talk with you. Best thing to do is send me an email. Blake White at redeemerabilene.com would be the best way to reach me. And so here's my overarching goal. I want to present to you what the Bible does and what my book does, which is I want you to see the design for sexuality, God's good design for sexuality. And my assumption is that most people are unfamiliar with it. Whenever people think about marriage, a lot of what they assume is that marriage is basically a legal way to recognize a relationship. That's what it means this year. But that's not the way it was intended. That's not the way God created it. I think a lot of people don't know why God made us the way he did. Do you know why God made us male and female? Is it merely to reproduce? I mean, that's the most obvious part, but is that it? Or do you even know what masculine and feminine mean? Why did God make us with these characteristics that we call masculine and feminine? And marriages fall apart oftentimes, at least at some level, because they don't really know what marriage is for. And so there's disagreement that arise from the fact that they don't know why God made us this way and what marriage is for, what God is accomplishing through marriage. And beyond that, a lot of our interpersonal conflicts that are male-female type of conflicts are because we don't know why God made us this way. Now, whenever Jesus was asked a question about divorce, Matthew 19, we'll look at this Sunday morning. Whenever Jesus was asked a question about divorce, the Pharisees were testing him, and they wanted to know about some matter of the law, the Old Testament law. But Jesus, he said, like, have you not read that he who made them from the beginning made them male and female? And so Jesus said, if you want to understand divorce, some fracturing of a relationship, you don't just go to some text in Deuteronomy and exegete that text. You want to know where that text came from and what God was intending with the design of marriage in the first place, and that is at the beginning. You look back at the beginning. So Jesus tells us a hermeneutical principle about interpreting the Bible regarding sexuality. He says you need to look at the beginning. So one way you can think about this is if you're putting together a jigsaw puzzle. You don't just put all the pieces on the table and start jamming them together however you want. There's always a picture on the box. And the picture on the box tells you how the pieces fit together. And it's the same thing with Genesis 1 and 2, with sexuality. That is, if you look in Genesis 1 and 2, that's the picture on the box that tells us what was God doing, how did God make this, and then the fracturing of sin that occurred, the fracturing of sexuality that occurred because of sin. How do we put it back together? It's like we need to look at the box. And so in our second session, we're going to look at the picture on the box. But when it comes to marriage itself, the meaning of it, the purpose of it, uncorrupted by sin, that's what we'll see in the next session. And my goal this weekend is for you to see the picture on the box so that way you can know through the redemptive power of Jesus and the gospel, what is the ideal that we're aiming at? And also, what do we do when we fall short? So 3 goals specifically, or 3 things that I want to do this weekend, is I want to give you a clearer picture of why God made us male and female. That's the picture on the box. I want to give you, second, some practical takeaways that you can implement right away. And that'll be mostly tomorrow with 12 principles of first-generation patriarchy. And then the third is to point you throughout, at every point you to the grace of Jesus Christ. Because one of the unique things about sexual sin is that it creates life in some cases. And sexual sin introduces permanent sort of conditions in our lives that you can't just rewind the clock on. So if somebody's an alcoholic, you can repent of your alcoholism and then, try to move on with your life and make the most of it the way the best you can. But with sexuality, a lot of times there's like a child that's entered the picture, or you have a relationship, a marriage that's broken up, and you're now remarried, and now you have step-sisters, half-brothers, you have step-parents, you have broken families, and now you're trying to hold these things together, and you're doing so in a permanent way because these families are meant to be permanent. And so because of that, we need to just bathe everything we talk about in the grace of God, because that is probably the biggest thing that keeps people from really moving toward the holiness in their sexuality, is they feel like they're in an unrepentable situation. So I want to tell everybody here, there is no situation that is beyond the reach of God's grace. So no matter what kind of predicament you find yourself in, you may be on your second or third marriage. You may have a blended family with stepkids, half brothers and sisters. There may be all kinds of junk that you came in here tonight with. And so while I'm showing you the picture on the box, you might think that's unattainable. And it might be, practically speaking. You may not be able to, or you're not able to go back and put back your first marriage back together if you're on a second or third marriage. Nevertheless, Jesus finds us where we are, not where we should have been. And so we need to keep this in view. This is so important. And we always keep the grace of God in view whenever we're talking about difficult things that are the reminders of just where we fall short. One final word before we move into the body of this. I'm looking out here and I see a variety of ages. The people that I think that most need to hear what I have to say are the younger ones. So I want to catch you before you build your life around error and you marry into and have children and you build a lifestyle around errors. So I want to catch you now and hopefully push you and challenge you in ways that will get you aligned up with the picture on the box. For those of you that are older, I'm not saying tune out. What I'm saying is you can be a great help and support for these younger families that haven't yet entered into the life stages that you are currently through or going through, okay? Here's my personal background. We'll start here. My parents divorced when I was 7, and easily it was the defining event of my childhood, the most impactful thing. And in those days where I lived, that was very unusual. Everybody came from intact homes when I was a kid. And my dad is a very godly man, a good man. But for most of my childhood, I didn't live with my dad. I lived with my mom and my stepdad. My mom is a good woman, and she has made some big mistakes in those days, and she readily acknowledges to me she has a lot of regrets. She regrets a lot of the things that she did when she was younger. And so whenever she was early on in her marriage, they had a couple kids, my older sister and I. She got a little antsy and wanted to get out of the house and get a job, and so she took a job as a bank teller. And there was a man in there who was a married man who saw this young, pretty woman, and he was a snake, and he kind of weaseled his way into her life, and they ended up having an affair. And so I remember driving to church with my family when I was a kid, right around this time. And I'm in the back seat. We're on our way to church, and I look over in the back seat of the car, and I'm like, I found this thing, and I'm like, Dad, it's your wallet. I found your wallet here in the back seat of the car. Here you go, Dad. And my dad sees the wallet. He's like, kids, why don't you head on inside, and your mother and I are going to have a talk. So we did. And that was how this affair came out into the open. And as it turned out, she was pregnant with the child of the man that she was sleeping with. And so now my dad, who's a good, godly man, he's in a difficult situation of there's this permanent change introduced into his life. So what's he going to do? And I mean, he really wrestled. It's like, do I raise this child as my own? Do we split up? What do we do? And without getting into all the details of that, he made the decision that at this point, based on what had happened and the conversations he was having with my mother, this marriage is broken beyond repair, and so they got a divorce. The man that my mother had an affair with, his name is Dean, and she ended up marrying him. And I still remember the day that she called me. She called me. I was at my dad's house at the time. She called. She said, Michael, my other sister was on the phone too. She goes, I need to tell you something. And even though I was like 8 years old, I knew it's like she married that guy. And I barely knew him. I mean, I'd only met him a couple times. But she's like, I married this guy, and my heart sank. I mean, I was just devastated. I didn't like this guy. But this guy, he was a serial adulterer, and he had multiple affairs over the years. I don't have time to tell you the story about how I bugged the phone once and gave my mom a cassette that I'd hooked up the phone to a Radio Shack tape player, and I gave my mom a cassette tape of the conversations I had recorded of him dirty talking a woman on the phone who happened to be her sister. So Dean had an affair with my aunt. But my mom did not want to be the woman who was twice divorced. And so she's like, I've already made my mistakes, and I'm paying for them now, and I don't want to divorce again. And so he always had a way of, I'm so sorry, baby, I'll never do that again. Or he'd deny it, and she knew he was lying, but really, she just went along with it because it was easier. It was simpler. And he always swore he'd never do it again, and so she wanted to make it work somehow. So I've got 3 sisters in my family. I have a full sister. She's my older sister that my mom and dad had together. I have a stepsister that was, I'll have to tell you that, I can tell you that story maybe in the Q&A or something if somebody wants to ask about it. I have a stepsister, and it's relevant because I am my own stepbrother. So if you want to, that'll be the cue to know, it's like, I want to ask about that. If you want to ask about that, I can tell you that story during some other time. But a stepsister, I am my own stepbrother, and I have a half-sister, which is the one that was the product of this affair. She's 8 years younger than me. So about 20 years ago, my older sister called me, And I remember the date because it was right before my oldest child was born. So my wife was pregnant with our first, and it was just a couple months before her due date. So it was right around 20 years ago. My older sister called me out of the blue, and I could tell by the tone in her voice that she was about to tell me something that was going to rock my world and change my life. And she did. So, Michael, I've got something to tell you. Dean molested me as a child, and it continued all the way until the day I moved out of the house. And on one level, I was shocked. But on another level, there was a part of me that always knew. I always knew this man is a deviant snake. He's a pervert. He's an adulterer. He's a creepy guy, and he's always creepy. And I'd always really hated him, to be honest with you. But at that moment, there was just a rage that I'd never felt before or since that came over me, to where for a few weeks I was having nightmares about murdering this man. I was just infuriated at this guy, and I hated just the tornado that he represented that just ripped through my family. He was a predator that saw a vulnerable woman working at a bank, and he just kind of sweet-talked her into his arms, and then my whole family was destroyed because of that. So I hated this guy. So this was 20 years ago, and from the day that she told me that, I've not spoken a word to him since. And what's really ironic, I did a similar conference to this in Iowa earlier this year, and while I was at that conference, I got a call from my younger sister, because this is her dad. And she said, Dean is dying, and he may not live much longer, and he died that weekend. And so I was like sharing this story while he was dying, and I hadn't spoken to him in 20 years. So all the kind of weird feelings and memories that come about from your kind of causes you to reflect on your whole childhood. So it was a very just weird, difficult situation. So that's the home I grew up in. Let me see if I'm checking my little time thing here, because they told me I'm on a time crunch. That's the home I grew up in. My stepdad basically was an anti-father figure to me. And some of you may have grown up in an environment like this. You grew up around a man that you despise, and sociologists will tell you we derive our God concept from our father. Not entirely, of course, but our initial impulses and our impressions more at the subconscious, preconscious level of who God is are formed by whoever the dominant father figure is in our life. And I hated this guy my whole life. And he was like this big, beefcake, macho, athlete kind of guy. It's very strong, very aggressive, very loud, bossy. And he is the guy, he's like the poster child for what the feminists would call toxic masculinity. He was it. He was that guy, right? And so his own father died when he was 10 years old. So he grew up without a father figure. He grew up with a cruel, very cruel mother that always withheld affection from him. And so he had his own demons that he was wrestling with. Now, like I said, my dad, my father is a wonderful man. Loved him, and we're close to this day. His birthday's tomorrow. A lot of September birthdays in my family. His birthday is tomorrow. A wonderful man, but my stepdad was the man I grew up around, and I lived with him because, like most kids, you want to be where mommy is. And so I wanted to be around my mom, even though this tyrant, cruel man came with the picture. And so because of this, I grew up feeling out of place because I was a boy and I wanted to be a man, but the most, the largest father figure that loomed over my childhood was a man that I'm like, you are exactly the opposite of everything and anything I'd ever want to be in a man. And so I had to figure it out for myself. I had to figure out what does it mean to be a man? And I tell you this story, I'll just interject this here. I tell you this story because I think a lot of you may be in this situation. I know in my ministry context, a lot of people are in this situation. They hold convictions biblically, but they've never seen it lived out. So they see, okay, the Bible tells me these things about manhood and these things about womanhood, but I've never seen a healthy picture of it in my life because the family that raised me is so messed up and broken, and I've never seen it. And so you want to change the trajectory of your family. You want to start something new, but you're doing it without any experience. That's why I call this first generation patriarchy. It's like English as a second language. It's never your native tongue. And so for a lot of you, you probably hold, if you're in the churches and you came to this conference, if you're familiar with anything I say online, then you know what I stand for and what I assume all the churches here stand for. So you would check the right boxes doctrinally, but it's first generation. It's not your native tongue, and you don't know how to live it. That's why I want to focus on so much practical stuff while I'm here. So we've absorbed a lot of messages about masculinity and femininity from pop culture. TVs, movies, music, Taylor Swift songs. And it's like a lot of girls are thinking, I won't say the word, but blank the patriarchy. That's like, I've seen video clips of a stadium full of teenage girls shouting out that line in a song to Taylor Swift, and they're thinking, like all the things that I'm going to talk about over the next 4 sessions is exactly the thing that Taylor Swift and all of her minions would say we should tear down. It's evil, it's toxic, it's cruel, it's oppressive, and I want to shatter that myth during our time together. But be that as it may, we're a product of our culture, and whether you acknowledge it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, you have been breathing the fumes of feminism your whole life, culturally. It's the air we breathe. It is the presumed reflexes of our lives are feminist in nature, and feminism is ungodly. It's harmful, and I'll demonstrate that as we go through. So this is, what I'm describing to you is also the ministry context that I come from. So I have pastored and planted a church in the inner city of Cincinnati, Ohio, and the people in my church are all, not all, but mostly these urban type people, and they're Bible-believing Christians that come to my church. But I'm pretty close to the University of Cincinnati, so we have a steady stream of young people that are 18 to 22 years old, and they're just getting started out. Now, whenever I started my church, the coveted demographic to reach was the millennials, and we had oodles and oodles of millennials coming to our church. And there was this young, restless reform movement, names like Tim Keller that was spearheading this, John Piper, these kind of guys. And they would all be like gospel-centered type of people. And they're smart, they're successful, and they love God. They want to obey God with their lives. They're doctrinally sound. They believe the Bible is the holy, inerrant, inspired word of God. They'd say all that. They're reformed, and they would all say they're complementarian. I imagine everybody in this room would probably subscribe to some version of complementarian theology. But when I say they're complementarian, what my experience I started to observe is that they're complementarian on paper, but they're feminist in practice, because they've never seen it. They didn't grow up around it, and what they did grow up around, they've been conditioned to think that any assertion of male headship or male leadership, or a wife submitting to her husband, or a wife prioritizing her home or whatever, those things are the remnants of the toxic patriarchy that destroyed our society, supposedly. But they would all say they're complementarian. So there was a lot of men that would say they're complementarian, but they didn't know how to lead their homes. In fact, they thought that leading their home meant, well, I find out what my wife wants me to do, and then I lead her by doing what she tells me to do. It's the man is the head and the wife is the neck, and she just kind of turns in whichever way she wants. That's their idea of complementarian male headship. And then you'd have complementarian women. They would say, I want to be submissive to my husband. Of course I'm submissive to him. And so I want to send him to that men's event so that he can learn how to be a better man, because I want to make sure he learns how to be a better man. And I'm like, you're leading your husband. You're doing the thing that the Bible tells you not to do. You're trying to push him to be something. But they would all sign the doctrinal statement. And so the point is that this is a major blind spot in our tribe. It's a blind spot in our culture, but at least it's a blind spot for us, because probably everybody here would say they're complementarian, but we don't realize that we fail to apply it. And even as I say this, I imagine some of you might be kind of feeling nervous. What's he going to say that we should do to apply it? I want you to feel at ease, because it's the big thing, the banner over this whole conference that I want to communicate to you is that God's design is not oppressive and bad. God's design is good. It is good. And if you can find a way to put into practice the things we'll talk about, you will flourish. You're not going to be perfect. You're not going to be sin-free. But this is you lining yourself up with the way God made the world and saying, I want to live with God's design. I want to follow the grain of God's design. In my church, whenever I would teach about these things, people would get scared and angry. Especially if I'd speak about feminism, things like this, they would get kind of hacked off at me. And what I would hear from them is they would say things like, well, that's not very sensitive to women. What you said was hurtful. And I'm like, I literally read the Bible. I just read the verses. I didn't even say anything. But they're like, that was hurtful and insensitive. Because I was like, I get it. You're catechized by feminism and you don't know it. But that's where we are. Some of them had already, it was kind of, the sunk cost bias, where once you follow a path for so long, even if that path is the wrong path, you recognize that, oh, this was the wrong way to go, but I'm too far in to turn back. And so they're just like, I've already built a life around feminist assumptions and purchased by feminist luxuries, and now there's no turning back. So I'll give you an example. There's a woman in my church she worked at she's not in my church anymore, but she was a doctor. And she worked at Cincinnati Children's Hospital. And she was one of 6 doctors in the country that could do her particular specialty. People would fly in from all around the world to go to this hospital so she could see them. She was top-notch at what she did. And she was working 60, 70 hours a week. And I was seeing the toll it was taking on her kids. I'm like, your kids never see you. And so she wanted to meet with me to complain about the direction of the church. And I was like, listen, the direction of the church is not the problem here. I said, your children don't see their mom enough. Your kids need your mommy. And I don't care if you could heal the world, you are the mother of these children. These are your babies. They need their mama. And I know you have this skill, but she's like, she didn't say this, but I imagine she was thinking, what are you going to do? Nobody else can do this. And we've built a house, a lifestyle, luxuries, cars, bills, expenses, all predicated upon this income that I'm earning. So there's sunk cost bias. What do you do in that situation? So a lot of these people are catechized by a lot of the resources that we maybe some of you all read these. I think Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today, their reputation is tarnished, and rightly so, because they're both compromised publications. But they've been for years, decades, publishing articles like this. They'll talk about singleness, and they'll say being single is just as good as being married, or maybe even better, and marriage might be an idol. Being a mother might be an idol. They're writing those articles. They'll say with children, having children is optional for Christians, and Christians can choose if they want to have kids or not. They'll publish articles saying, when it comes to school, public school, home school, private Christian school, whatever, it's all the same. They're all equally just as good. Choose whichever one you want. And ironically, Christianity Today just last week or two published an article about how Christian parents should send their kids to public school as the best option. They're saying it's like weight training for kids. They're going to learn how to overcome obstacles and stuff. It's careless and foolish what they wrote. Toward women, they'll say women can and should lead in the church as much as their complementarian views will allow, which means we should, as much as you can stomach going against God's design, that's what you should do. Jen Wilkins says that. Regarding homosexuality, they'll say you can be a gay Christian as long as you're not having intercourse with other people. As long as you're celibate, you can call yourself a gay Christian. You can even have formalized gay relationship ceremonies that we won't call them weddings or marriages necessarily. We'll call them gay covenant partnerships or something. And as long as there's no genital contact, it is just as, is good and is redemptive and glorious, and there's artifacts of queer beauty that'll be in the new heavens and new earth. They said this at a Revoice conference. People say this. This is the kind of stuff that's kind of seeping into the church world, and unless it is directly confronted and corrected, we just go along thinking, well, Christianity Today said it, Billy Graham founded the thing, so it's got to be good. All of these examples that I'm mentioning here are taught and promoted by Christian leaders who will claim to be complementarian. And the practical questions are undergirded by unbiblical feminist assumptions that have seeped into the church. And these assumptions ignore the basic facts of how God designed men and women. And the thing is, like, your sexuality, these are not incidental biological features for the purpose of reproduction only. Your sex goes all the way down to your soul. Like, your maleness or femaleness goes all the way down. And it shapes and colors everything about you. And that is wonderful. I love that about the way God made us. The differences, the way that women think, are fascinating to me. It makes no sense at all. But it's fascinating to me. But it makes perfect sense to a woman. And I'm like, those are the things that are part of the wonder and beauty and comedy of life. It's wondrous. And I love women that act like women. And I love men that act like men. And I love the funny things that arise whenever you have men that know that they're men and they're proud of it. You have women that know they're women and they're proud of it. And they can tease each other about their differences. And that's a time-honored tradition that goes back for millennia until the last 15 years or so, where we've forgotten everything. And we don't even know what a woman is anymore. So where we are now is the devil has been attacking this from the beginning. We live in a day of sexual anarchy, and we've been rebelling against our own bodies. In the last 20 years or so, it's at warp speed. And so this is the locus of Satan's attack on the human race has always been the family. That's where the image of God is represented. We'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll talk about that next session. But Satan knows that if you destroy the family, you destroy society, because he always wants to strike at the very heart of God's design. So how do we get here? There are 6 big ideas that I want to share with you. I want to read a text from Ephesians 5, and then I want to share 6 big ideas that kind of will map out for you. These are worldview type things that brought us here. So Ephesians 5, verse 1 through 17. Let's hear God's word. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. Let no one deceive you with empty words, for because of these things the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore do not be partners with them. For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true, and try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light. Therefore it says, awake, O sleeper, and arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Look carefully then how you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. This is God's word. verses 11 through 14 is what we're going to do for the rest of our time this session. I want to shine a light on the darkness because the sexual insanity of our day did not arise out of a vacuum, but are the consequences of ideas. So hang with me. This will be the most abstract and philosophical stuff that we'll cover. These 6 points, and I set my timer to go for 45 minutes. I'll probably go long on this one and borrow time elsewhere. But 6 belief systems. So the first one, I will give you 6. Number 1 is Gnosticism. Gnosticism. In the early church, Gnosticism was a known doctrine that was condemned by the early church as heresy, but it never really went away. It just rebranded. It's been repackaged, and now it's here again, as I'll describe it. And you'll recognize it as I describe it here. So Gnostics believed a few things. One of them is a strict separation between the material realm and the spiritual realm. Strict separation, and that includes the human body. Number 2, the material realm, physical matter, material realm, is thoroughly evil and corrupt. Therefore, this physical body is thoroughly evil and corrupt. Number 3, the spiritual realm is thoroughly pure and good. Thus, your soul, the inner you, is pure and good, maybe even divine. Number 4, salvation is achieved at the end of life when the corrupt body dies and your soul escapes the prison of the body. And then you are the material you, the real you is able to be free and to flourish. Now there's other things that could be said about it, and there's different strands and varieties. I don't want to be too technical with it. But those are basic tenets of Gnosticism that you can read in any garden variety Bible dictionary. Look up Gnosticism, you'll see these ideas. Now, it probably sounds familiar, right? Because you see how these ideas are applied in the modern world. People now assume, many of them, that biological sex can be different than gender identity. Have you heard this? I'm sure we all have. If you haven't, you've been under a rock because it's everywhere. Biological sex is different than gender identity. It's what they teach. That's purely Gnostic thinking. However, it's being taught. It's been taught in elementary schools, and it's just a resurrected version of Gnosticism, but it's everywhere. And they'll teach kids things like what's on the inside is all that counts. What's on the inside, that's the real you. The real you is what's on the inside, and what your body tells you, that means nothing at all, because it could be very different than what's your gender identity, how you feel on the inside. Now, Genesis 1:27, the picture on the box, and Jesus quotes this in Matthew 19. What does he say? God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So God said, he created material, man and woman. They said, this is very good. This is a wonderful, beautiful, glorious thing. In fact, this is the representation of God himself. It's his image planted in this garden. And there's 2 kinds of that image. There's a male kind and there's a female kind. And the male kind is physically male, and he's male all the way to the bone and into the soul. And there's a female kind, and she is female all the way to the bone and into the soul. Every cell in your body, every DNA strand is marked with XX or XY chromosomes because you are sexed, every cell in your body. 1 billion years from now, some archaeologist, different job. Some archaeologists could dig up your dead bones, and nowadays, I don't know if she was male or female, or maybe it's a zim, zer, he, hey, they, whatever, but an archaeologist could be like, okay, let's do a DNA. Okay, chromosomes, that's a man. Because that's who you are. I mean, that's the way God made you. And we've gotten real cute with this. So Christianity teaches not, you have a body, you're a body and you have a soul. That's kind of a Gnostic thinking. Christianity teaches you're a soul. That's who you are, and God gave you a body. But you are an embodied soul. That means that there's not this strict separation. It's like God made us physical, and in eternity, in the new heavens and the new earth, we will be physical. You know, you might have heard the transgender shooter in Nashville. Audrey Hale, she's born a girl, and her parents gave her the name Audrey Hale. I think she tried to go by Aiden or something, but she was hyped up on testosterone and trying to change who she is. And they had the manifesto that was suppressed for a couple years until recently it came to light. And I just want to read you one quote, and pardon the language alert here, but I want you to hear what she says, because this is Gnostic thinking. In her journal, she said, quote, "If God won't give me a boy body in heaven, then Jesus is a faggot." And she thoroughly believed that she would be welcomed into the pearly gates with Jesus there celebrating who she is, because that's just God. Her mind is broken, and it's broken by this Gnostic thinking. All right, that's number one. Number two, feminism. I've already been picking on it, so I'm going to pick on it a little bit more. Feminism is a fruit that is plucked off of the Gnostic tree. It's just an application of Gnosticism to one of the two sexes. Feminism is Gnostic logic applied to women and enabled by technology. We'll get to that in a moment. But Gnosticism says the human body is bad. Feminism says the female body is bad. And not just the female body, but the reproductive aspects, the particular things that make a woman unique. Those things are bad. Their objective is to make women more like men. And so feminism regards a woman's fertility as a hindrance to her progress that needs to be overcome. Kamala Harris, what are all the one thing that anybody that will actually go on record telling you they're voting for Kamala Harris and what they like about her, what's the thing they like about her? Abortion. We'll get to kill our babies. Of course, they bury it in these euphemisms and sophistry. It's like, oh, reproductive health, reproductive freedom, garbage. She will protect our reproductive rights, meaning that she will ensure that we can continue killing our babies, because if a baby is in my womb, it's a parasite. It's feeding off of my resources. It's killing me. It's this foreign substance. I don't want it. That's feminism. Feminism sees a woman's reproductive ability, her fertility, as a barrier to her progress. So they will never regard their fertility as being biologically determined in a fundamental calling. They see it as a curse. And so they'll call it equality. Now, what they mean by equality is they want women to be able to act just like men. Whenever feminists say equality, think sameness. They want women to be able to act just like men, which means they want to have sex without consequences. There's a different cost involved in sex for men and women. For women, the cost could be she gets pregnant, which, a lifetime of responsibilities, which is why God created it to go into marriage. But feminists want women to be able to have sex just like a man with no consequences at all. And so I'll move on to the next one. The next one is contraception. Contraception. So this is the technology part. So feminism predates the birth control pill. But the birth control pill really kicked feminism into overdrive, because it removed some of the physical things you'd have to do for contraception before that. But it created this illusion of total interchangeability, consequence-free sex. So and this contraceptive technology has changed the world. I don't think we're so used to it. It's such a part of life now that we don't realize just what a massive change it introduced into our society. So God designed three things to go together, and they always go together, and they should never be apart. Marriage, sex, babies. If you get one, you should have all three. The birth control pill changed that dramatically. I can't improve upon this. I want to read you a long quote, but it's worth it. Listen to this quote from Shane Morris. This is a tweet that he wrote that went so viral and controversial that Dr. Phil had him on a show to talk about this tweet. So here's what he said. He said, "We vastly underestimate the extent to which debates over gender roles, even within the church, are founded on the presumption that sex can be reliably had without producing babies. The sheer fact of birth control has thrown even Christians into a world of artificial confusion. Should a woman build a career or be a mom? What city will she live in? How much education will she pursue? Should she date around or settle and get married? How many kids should she have? What standard of living does she demand? What will her work-home balance be with her partner? Take away the drugs and devices used to artificially suppress her reproductive system, and a stunning number of these questions simply answer themselves. People's whole mental landscape about sex changes because it's no longer some self-expressive game, it's the origin of life. We have this dumb modern conceit that our great-grandparents were prudes with their modesty standards and shotgun weddings. They were not. Back then, sex made babies. Do you really understand that? To even think of fooling around was to invite a cascade of life-altering events. We've forgotten this because the spell of contraception has so altered our worldview that we don't even understand our bodies anymore. When young people today, even in the church, say they're not sure they want kids, they are almost never saying they're not sure they want sex. They're saying they want to chemically isolate the very beginning of the human reproductive cycle so they can dwell in maximal gratification indefinitely while pursuing idealized middle-class hobbies and status symbols. Oh man, and he's just getting started. He said, I've seen Christian young people get married with this mentality without even the intention or openness to having kids. What we don't often realize is what an absolutely bizarre and unnatural frame of mind this is and how dependent it is on technology. For almost all of human history, the choice was celibacy or babies. Those limits were very good for us. And marriage and exclusivity flowed naturally out of them, together with culturally appropriate gender roles. Marriage really is natural. Now, those roles and even marriage itself looks incredibly quaint and arbitrary, but they're not arbitrary. They're deeply fitted into the grooves of human nature and have honed us for millennia. The tie between sex and babies has shaped our households, our clans, our clothes, our legal system, our economies, our nations, our civilizations, our psyches, and in about a single generation, we broke that tie. What do we think would happen? It is critical that we understand that we are the products of an iron link between sex and reproduction. Our medical and chemical wizardry may prevent contraception, but it cannot change our natures. The pain, questions, confusion, and chaos surrounding sex and gender today are largely, I'm increasingly convinced, the result of an innovation we didn't realize would subtly destroy us. Mic drop. That is a powerful quote, and I think he's absolutely right. Number 4, androgyny. Androgyny. Androgyny refers to the blending of male and female characteristics in a single person. And so androgyny, it would be more extreme versions would be something like non-binary or queer, meaning neither male nor female. But, more everyday versions that we might not notice so much are androgynous impulses, such as a woman soldier in the military, infantry soldier, a woman police officer out there trying to arrest dudes that are twice their size and strength, or men who are stay-at-home dads by their own choice. Those are androgynous choices, even though they may not be, I'm non-binary or queer, but that's an expression of androgyny because they're not living according to the way God made them as male and female. Now, some of you might be upset that I use those examples because maybe there's some female police officers here, or maybe there's some other situation that I'm not aware of, and that's why I get to make the mess and your pastors can clean it up when I go home. But I don't mean that to call anybody out or be cruel. I mean like that there are occupations that are natural and unnatural for men and women. But the fact that somebody would be upset proves my point. You're upset not because I'm wrong, but because you're conditioned to think I'm wrong. Because technology has blurred the distinctions between male jobs and female jobs. It used to be if you wanted a ditch digger, you needed to be a dude that could dig ditches. Now you can just sit in an excavator and do this. And a woman can do that just as easily as a man, but that doesn't change the fact that that is a more masculine type of occupation. A construction site is more of a masculine type of role. Culture has catechized us into thinking that men and women should be absolutely interchangeable except when biologically necessary to reproduce, and that's it. I mean, all right, I know you've seen Marvel movies. They're so absurdly stupid at how you've got these little petite 5'2" girls that weigh 108 pounds throwing around, the Incredible Hulk, just like doing these flips, so they'll jump up and like wrap her legs around his neck and then slam him down. And I'm like, come on. That is just stupid. It's ludicrous. And the fact that we think this way, all of us are conditioned to think that way. Women are conditioned to think that, well, that's the way it is. They think I'm actually stronger than I really am. And then you have men whose restraint against hitting women are being slowly eroded by pop culture because they see in movies like men and women, they're just fighting the way anybody else is. And so it increases violence against women because it removes the restraints that God gave men to have to never hit a woman because he knows he's stronger than her and he will hurt her. He should not treat her that way. And we watch these Marvel movies and these, women, bad girl movies that are, tough girls and stuff, and it breaks our minds. And it's so common and ever present, we don't even notice it. We don't even notice it. Number 5, last two are shorter. Number 5, Obergefell. So this is not so much a worldview and ideology as it is it is the legal legitimization of everything I've just said before. So if you don't know the Obergefell Supreme Court decision, this happened in 2015. I still remember I was on vacation when the decision came down and it ruined my vacation. This is what gave us gay marriage. There is no such thing as gay marriage. It's leprechauns, unicorns, gay marriage. It doesn't exist. It's a fiction. But the Supreme Court has decided that reality itself is under their jurisdiction. And so they could just declare it to be so, and now people talk about gay marriage as though it's a thing, and now it's like, oh, they're trying to, people like me, they say, oh, you want to take away our right to marriage. I'm like, no, I'm wanting you to live within reality because you're not married. And then, some Christians are like, well, now, what would you have? These people get divorced? No, they're never married. There is no such thing as gay marriage. It doesn't happen. It doesn't exist. You can have people that, just like it's transgenderism applied to a relationship. And so you can play dress up and put makeup on, but that doesn't make you a woman if you're a dude. And you can walk down the aisle and 2 dudes in suits or 2 women wearing bridal gowns. That doesn't make you married. It's a fiction. But because it came from the Supreme Court, it was given cultural and political legitimacy overnight. It's now a legal, it's a fiction that is codified into our law. And so if the Supreme Court has the authority to redefine marriage, why should it stop there? If we can redefine whatever we want, why should we stop at redefining a relationship? Why can't we redefine what male and female itself is? And that's exactly what happened. I mean, if you notice just the headline, there was a Newsweek article that came out about a month before the Obergefell decision because everybody knew what Obergefell was going to be. Even beforehand, everybody kind of knew this was coming. And so Newsweek ran an article about the transgender revolution. And so they knew that this was the next logical step. Now that marriage has been redefined, we can now define sex itself. Male and female can be totally redefined. And this is where we are. We're currently on this particular spot on the slippery slope down into madness, and the slippery slope is undefeated. You might say, that slippery slope argument, it's a logical fallacy. I don't care. Slippery slope is undefeated. I mean, it's like, it's happening, and there's no brakes. I mean, what really is there to stop it? There's we have no cultural logic that can apply any brakes or any pressure at all to stop it. You have weird fundamentalist wackos like myself here in this, what the guy on the, I can't remember what the sign said, hate-filled bigot farm or something in here. But it's like, there's just wackos like us, we're the only ones that would sound the alarm about it. But otherwise, culturally speaking, it's just the way things are. We can declare anything. You can declare, the kid can declare himself to be a cat or whatever. I mean, I laugh because otherwise I'd be in tears. It's just so absurd. But these things are there's a progression here. So just let me show you the progression again. Gnosticism says what's inside and what's outside, they're totally separate. And what's inside is what really matters. Feminism applied that to women, and it said the fact that women are the ones that, only human beings that can bear children, that doesn't matter. She shouldn't have to bear that burden, and so it applied Gnosticism to women. Contraception made that technologically widespread and more possible. And then androgyny is the idea that men and women are interchangeable in every way because the biology doesn't matter. Obergefell made it legal. Transgenderism is the next front. Where does it go from here? I'll give you a hint. You don't want to hear it. But pedophilia is the next thing coming. It's already out there. And don't Google it. But it's out there. I mean, there are people that are making arguments and speaking TED Talks, and it's children are the next front. Drag queen story hour, sexualizing children, that's the next front. So I'll wrap up this session here with this. This is where we are, and the plus sign on LGBTQ+, the acronym, the plus sign is kind of like on a website, you push the plus sign and it opens up a menu. Like the plus sign is like, go out into a rock in the forest. And there's a big rock here. I want to lift it up. And you lift up that rock and there's all kinds of slimy bugs and gross creatures under there. The LGBTQ+, you click on that plus sign, you open it up, there's all kinds of slimy bugs and weird creatures under there. All kinds of sexual weirdness and perversions and kink that are reprehensible and destructive, and God hates it. I don't hate the people. I hope you don't hear that this is compassion from a man who loves people speaking. This is not just wanting to make fun of gay people. This is talking about these people are destroying themselves. And of course, it's, the news stories and the headlines. They're doing it chemically and the, hormone therapies and transgender surgeries and giving teenage girls, 14 years old, double mastectomies and boys having their penises cut off. I mean, they're doing these surgeries, and it is a heartbreaking criminal enterprise. But this is where we are. And it's like, if that won't stop us, what will? Now, I hate to be so dire and negative, but we've got to see where things are to be able to know, it's like, what are we trying to correct? So the things I'll tell you in the session to come, hopefully I want to show you a way out. Now, you can't control what the rest of Abilene, Texas wants to do. Just like I can't control what they do at Cincinnati Children's Hospital about 5 minutes from my house. But the people of God, the body of Christ, we could say, no. We want to obey God's design because it is good and true and beautiful, and we will flourish. And may God have mercy on us, and maybe at some point in the future we'll return to our senses and there'll be repentance. But we can control what we do personally. We can control what happens in our churches, and that's why I want to talk to you about in the next sessions.